Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Growing Up with Godzilla. My name is Donny Winter, and this is my show where I have conversations with Godzilla fans about how they've grown with the character and franchise over time. We are in the midst of season 4, which is still hard to believe. And we've had some familiar faces returning, we've had some new faces appearing this season. For this particular episode, I am nerding out because this is an individual I've wanted to have on the show for quite some time, and they are quite possibly one of the most multi-talented people I know, a Japanese literature scholar, a poet, professor, uh, translator. Without further ado, I would like to welcome on the wonderful Dr. Jeffrey Engels. How are you?
Hi, doing well. Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. It seems like hyperbole. I thought, like, who are you possibly talking about?
Who? What?
Well, thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
Of course. No, it's an honor to have you here. And honestly, like you've been, very much significantly present in the Godzilla fandom over the
Gosh.
past year or so because of your wonderful translation
Oh,
of Shigeru Kayama's Godzilla and Godzilla Raids Again. Has
oh,
that been a whirlwind for you?
it has been. It's been really fun. I as a Godzilla fan from way back, I had been interested for a long time, and so when I saw this opportunity to translate this book, I thought, oh my God, why has no one done this before? So, I wasn't really sure if anyone was going to pay attention when I translated it. I thought, there might be a few fans that like it, but yeah, the response has been amazing. So, yeah, it's
Well, we were paying attention.
been.
Trust me. No, no. So, and it's been like I think everyone's been really enjoying it as well. I know it was my Christmas or my holiday break reading, like back in December, and I was very much interested in especially the afterword that you had too, because like in the afterword you revealed like a lot of like really interesting information, ranging from things like Kayama's original message kind of being watered down a bit,
Mhm.
and scaled back with
Yeah,
regard to like the nuclear message, the anti-nuclear protest messaging, right? So
yeah.
what, like when you encountered that, like what was your like, were you like, oh wow, that's interesting, like
Absolutely, absolutely. So, I really like I mean, I love to read. That's all I do, really. Go figure. I'm a literature professor, but when I read things, I always like to read them against the time period in which they're made. I like to use literature as a window into a particular time, and so when I sat down and before I read the novelizations of Godzilla, the one that I translated, I thought, oh, I didn't expect really to get much more out of it than I got out of the movie, but honestly, there was so much hidden in there, and as I began to kind of probe into Kayama's story, Kayama was the guy who wrote the first draft of the screenplay as well as these novelizations, so he has a really intimate relationship to the monster. It was really exciting to figure out that there was so much there, and that this book was such a fantastic window into its particular time period. I mean, obviously the movie is too, but the book does a few things a little bit differently than the movie. So that was really exciting for me.
right. No, thank you for that, added historical context too regarding Kayama, but another takeaway that I found interesting in the book was, like, I feel like Godzilla, like, the victimization of Godzilla was very much more centralized in certain elements,
Yeah,
that I don't necessarily I mean, I think we saw, like, elements of it in the film
yeah,
when, like, characters who had more of a scientific motivation were, like, wanting to not destroy Godzilla, right? But I
right.
feel like in the book that became a little bit more central to like the conversation between the characters. What
Yeah,
was your like how did you like what was your reaction when you kind of like pieced that together?
yeah. I mean, it's clear from watching the film that part of the purpose of Godzilla was to raise a discussion about the ethics of science and what
Mhm.
are the responsibilities of scientists. We see that so loudly and loud and clear in the character of Serizawa, and his decision to commit suicide at the end of the film, so that the secret of the oxygen destroyer, this new weapon of mass destruction, goes to the grave with him. In the book, there's also this really strong question about how important it is to keep Godzilla alive so that we can study him. And there's some interesting moments in the book, which are even kind of more pronounced than in the film. There's a place where the character Yamane says, we during the past war, World War II, which ended just 9 years before the film came out. He says, during World War II, we Japanese, hurt our image on the world stage, and so this is our chance to kind of make up to the rest of the world to do something right,
Yeah.
using science. And so there was this kind of extra added historical dimension, which I felt like really helped enrich the that particular crux of the novel. That question about what the scientific responsibility was. So yeah, I like
And
those.
yeah, like I do feel like the book definitely has more of a, I don't know how to say, maybe like a global awareness. Like there's like more of a conversation about like the global role,
Mm,
as opposed to the film. I mean I guess that kind of goes along with Tanaka and Honda kind of like shifting Kayama's messaging a little bit to kind of remove, because I think one aspect that I remember reading about, especially in your afterword, was the fact that Kayama wanted to include like a montage of sorts,
right, right.
um,
Yeah.
of like prior, like I think it was what, like nuclear atrocities that had taken place, and in like kind of like editing of it, like the thoughts were like, oh, let's reduce this because we don't want it to be too overly political, which I thought that was an interesting choice. That was an
Yeah,
interesting
yeah.
choice.
Definitely, definitely. I found that all out when I was reading the document that's now in English called the G Project Scenario.
Hmm.
Um, in fact, the novellas that I translated, Godzilla and Godzilla Raids Again, in Japanese, the most commonly available version of it right now is from a company called Chikuma Shobo, and so they package these novellas together with that scenario, so you can read like the different iterations of Godzilla right, against each other back to back.
Hmm.
And so I'd never read it before. And so when I read it, I was so really surprised to find out that Kayama, as you said, wanted to open the film with a long voiceover in which he talked about the horrors of nuclear weapons. He wanted to talk about the bombing of the Marshall Islands, Bikini Atoll,
Hmm.
and he wanted to talk about this monstrous thing that was being released into the world in the
Yeah.
form of the hydrogen bomb. And as you said, like his G project scenario says, like, I'd like to show images of the Lucky Dragon number 5, this group of fishermen that were exposed, in the Marshall Islands. He
Hmm.
wanted to show a bunch of different historical things using historical footage. But as you said, when the people at Toho Studios got this scenario, I think they all thought, oh, this is much too political. It's much too controversial. We want to make a movie that people are going to enjoy. And I think, in 1954 in Japan, pretty much everybody was against
Hmm.
the use of nuclear weapons. Everybody
Hmm.
was against it. There was so I mean that was a relatively safe statement to make, I think, in
Right.
1954. So I get the impression that the director, screenwriters who were working the scenario that Kayama gave them into a film just decided, well, they can tone that down and still,
Hmm.
produce more or less the same effect.
Right.
The anti-nuclear message is definitely there in the final film that we
For
see and
sure.
know and love from 1954, but it doesn't club you over the head like like Kayama wanted to do. So, I honestly, I think that, while I appreciate Kayama and I certainly appreciate his pacifist spirit, I I think probably by toning it down a bit, they ultimately Honda and
Yeah.
producer Tanaka at Toho Studios did make a better film.
For sure. I really do think that Toho Studios was definitely keeping in mind like that audience awareness, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Like being only 9 years later, like having that level of politicization,
Mhm.
what would that do to audiences? Like how would that like emotionally impact the audiences, right? So no, I agree with you completely. But it's so interesting to kind of reflect on like those different iterations that could have potentially existed, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And one of the things that was really fun for me when I was working on this project, I realized that there were all these other iterations of Godzilla, very, very, very early iterations of Godzilla that are not available to English speakers.
Hmm.
For instance, in the run up to the November 1954 release of the film, there was a radio drama that was broadcast over national airways. Kind of like Orson Welles' War of the Worlds kind of thing. You know, it was a dramatization of the story of Godzilla, broadcast and acted out over the airwaves. When we have the script of it, it's in Kayama's complete works, and so it again is somewhat different than the film that we know because it
Mhm.
was produced before the film was released. So not all of the final changes and not all the final script, developments are in that radio drama. So there's one version of the Godzilla story that's unavailable to English speakers. I've got a fantasy of getting permission to translate that one day. Then there's also I found out like these very 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 early kind of a storybook version of Godzilla that was released just
Oh, wow.
about the time of the first movie. This is actually released in 1954 and October and November, so exactly the month that it was coming out. But it's got images of the Godzilla story as well as the text, and it's just so. Oh, sorry, I'm not holding it up for the camera very
That
well.
is so cool.
Again, yeah, like I saw this and I was like, holy, holy crap! Why do
I was gonna say you can swear if you want.
So yeah, so I found out that there are all these versions, and really these things are clearly designed just to get you excited about Godzilla. Do you know
Oh,
what I mean?
yeah.
Like, I mean, the radio drama, it seems like its entire purpose was just to get people thinking, like, what must this look like? I've got to go see this movie when it comes out. And this version too, it's got like little hints of what Godzilla might look like, but just enough to
Wow.
confuse you. So anyway, again, this is another thing I fantasize about, finding the ability to translate at some point.
The
Yeah.
projects are creating themselves at this
They
point, right?
do. It's amazing. It's amazing. And I've got to say the fact that the fandom is so eager to eat this stuff up, it's just so exciting to
We're
me.
hungry.
Yeah.
We're hungry. So,
I can,
okay. Well,
yeah.
as a shameless Mothra fan,
Yay.
um, I would be remiss if I did not ask about the Luminous Fairies and Mothra because that was also a novella, right?
It
So,
was. Uh-huh.
what's going on with that?
Yeah. So I'm not exactly sure how this happened. I'm not sure if fans out there coordinated or what, but once the news broke that University of Minnesota Press was publishing this, suddenly a bunch of people started writing to the press and saying, "We hope that you'll do the Luminous Fairies and Mothra next." And so apparently the press got enough messages that my editor came back to me and said, "Jeffrey, what do you know about this Luminous Fairies and Mothra thing?" And so I didn't have a copy of it, but I immediately ordered one. And, here it is, in book form.
Ah.
Ta-da! And so I read it. It's very short, actually. It's very quick, easy to read, and it's a quirky text. It's a very quirky text. But anyway, I got so excited about working on it that I said, "Please let me do it." And so there it is. It's I submitted the translation to the press about a month ago, and so it's at the copy editing stage and should be out towards the end of the year.
Oh, that gave me goosebumps. I'm so excited.
Yay.
No, I have wanted wanted this since I was
Oh,
like a teenager. So
oh, really?
I
Oh,
am so excited to hear this news.
oh,
Um,
that's wonderful, Donnie. You made my day.
yeah. Well, and I hope that in the future maybe you'll come back to Growing Up with Godzilla and we can have a
Of
full
course.
on full on conversation about it. I guess I mean if there's anything that you may be interested in revealing, like what has been like the most interesting thing
Oh,
that you've discovered or that you've taken away from
yeah.
your work on this translation?
Oh my gosh, there's so many things. I almost don't know where to start. Maybe let me tell you three things, if that's
Yeah.
okay. If,
3, that's
I'm
perfect.
not going to get too long. I'll try not to anyway. So there was a lot less kind of scholarly work on Mothra than there was on Godzilla. There's been quite a few people that have written very beautifully and very astutely about Godzilla, the film, but there's a lot less work on Mothra in general. So I felt like as I was working on it, there was a bunch of discoveries that I made, at least that were new to me, and were very exciting. One of them was the fact that this was written by 3 authors. I think that, the fans know that,
Mhm.
already probably, but, to me, that was relatively new information, and I was stunned to realize that these were not just very, very minor authors or very poppy kind of authors, but they're
Mhm.
all 3, like, super huge, important figures in mid-century, Japanese literature, all authors that have left a big imprint on literary history. And there were all 3 writers that were not, involved with the world of science fiction or fantasy at all,
Mhm.
other than this project. So
Wow.
it was a big surprise to realize that it was these 3 writers, who did it. One of the 3 writers is actually a fellow that I had liked very much for a long time. His name is, in the Japanese order, it's Fukunaga Takehiko, and he's also written a piece of work that's so beautiful. It's, I think, one of the most beautiful, like, novels of the mid 20th century. It's called Flowers of Grass or Flowers in Grass. I forget how it was translated in English, but
Mhm.
it's a very, very beautiful novel about a young person who has tuberculosis and is in a sanatorium towards the end of their life, feeling the world so passionately, so powerfully. He first falls in love with he falls in love with both a brother and a sister,
Mhm.
and both of whom are ill, and are there at the sanatorium with him. And so it's this very kind of quirky love story that was written around 1960, and very, very
Interesting.
beautiful. But anyway, so I had read this before and I loved it. And I was so surprised to realize that this was one of the same authors who contributed to Mothra. So anyway, so that was one discovery. There was another one that really surprised me. I of course had watched the movie Mothra and loved it. It's so quirky. It's so
It's
weird.
quirky, there's a little camp, it's
Yeah,
colorful.
yeah. Super camp. Yeah, I love it.
The
And
music is great.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, there's a scholar named Michael Bordash who's written a really great article about the history of the music of Mothra. So anyone who's interested in it, I recommend it very highly. Michael Bordash, type in music Mothra. It's on the net. You'll find it. But anyway, I digress. So one of the things that I'd watched the film, and it didn't strike me as kind of political or sort of socially oriented as Godzilla 1954 was, or some of the other movies in the Godzilla series are. It struck me as much more of a fantasy. But when I sat down and I read the book, I was really stunned to realize that there is a lot of political content in there.
Mhm.
The novella was released in January of 1961, and that was just months after the largest political protest that Japan has ever seen in its history. There were these protests in 1960 called the Ampo protests,
Mhm.
which were enormous, that brought millions, literally millions of people into the streets protesting the Japanese government. And the reason for these protests was that in 1960, the Japanese government kind of forced through a revision of the US Japan peace treaty, which basically kind of brought Japan under the nuclear umbrella of the
Uh-huh.
United States. And so there was a lot of people in Japan who were very concerned about siding too strongly with the United States because, like, the Soviet Union is right there. It's literally
Right.
miles away from Japan. You can, from the north part of Japan, you can practically see some of the Russian islands. So,
Mhm.
they were very concerned about being like too closely associated with America, and thought that they might be putting themselves in harm's way with, by siding with the other power. So, like, tens of thousands, then hundreds of thousands, then millions of people went on strike, over this political issue. But nonetheless, the government rammed it through, and it was very, very unpopular amongst the Japanese population to be tied so closely to the American military with its nuclear arsenal.
Mhm.
The entire book is a reaction to that. There's a number of points like throughout the book that are have not do not appear in the film, that are very specifically calling back these particular protests. And fans will remember that Russia and America have kind of been
Mhm.
brought together to make like one gigantic superpower. In the book
Mhm.
called Rossilica or
Relisica or something
Rolis-
like that.
that's right. In the book, it's Roshirika, and then the movie, it's Rorishika. They changed
Mhm.
the names just ever so slightly. But anyway, but the point is, in the film, or in the book, this big superpower is kind of the nasty guy that just sort of does whatever it wants, right? And
Mhm.
and because of that, Japan suffers. And the whole point of the original novel was to kind of try to encourage Japanese people to see themselves apart from the superpowers. The whole message of the book is, rather than siding with the superpowers, why aren't we allying with the small, new, decolonizing nations of the world, like the little places like Infant Island? Why are we?
Ah,
Shouldn't we be allies to them? Shouldn't we be the helpers to them, rather than just kind of being slavishly connecting ourselves with the Cold War superpowers? So
right.
so I was really surprised to find out that there's this very strong political message in the original text, and again, just like before, the same producer for this for the movie Mothra was Tanaka Tomoyuki, the same guy who was the producer for 1954 Godzilla. And so I guess when he first saw the plan for Mothra, he's like, oh. Dudes, this is way too. This sounds like an independent movie, by which he meant like this sounds like something that Toho should not be doing. So, he decided to kind of tone it down. So anyway, so I was, as I mentioned earlier, I really like these movies because they give us an interesting window into cultural history, and this one, like, I think the book does that even more than the film does.
Mhm,
So,
mhm,
I really got super excited. The text is pretty short
mhm.
here, and I think it'll probably be, I don't know, like 40, 50 pages in the translation. But then I
Mhm.
wrote afterward that's like 50 or 60 pages, just talking about the cultural history and
I
all these.
love the afterwards, though.
Oh, yay! Thank you. The other third thing that I'd like to mention, that I realized and I got really excited about is the fact that Mothra undergoes a lot of transformations in the novella, just as in the film. One of the writers, Nakamura Shinichiro, when he was approached by Toho Studios, he thought, well, wouldn't it be fun to have Mothra go through a series of transformations, so that we can do different kinds of special effects on screen. We can, Tsuburaya at Toho Studios could work his magic in a bunch of different ways rather than just showing like one kind of monster or something. So he came up with the idea of using a moth and having the moth go through stages of transformation. Of course, we knew about that from the movie, but one of the things that struck me when reading the book is that Mothra goes. One of the transformations that Mothra goes through is a transformation in gender. Mothra starts out. Japanese is a language that doesn't require you to use any gender pronouns at all. You can
Mhm.
easily write an entire book without using any gender pronouns. Very easy. But so for the first part of the book, Mothra is just not described with any pronoun at all. So there's no hint at all about what gender Mothra might be when Mothra is still the egg.
Mhm.
But then at a certain point, like once Mothra turns into a larva and is kind of like swimming across the ocean towards Japan, there's a kind of funny moment when suddenly the text starts referring to that larva as he, using the very gendered male pronoun.
Mhm.
And then at this point, after that, in once Mothra reaches Japan, there is a kind of exciting moments where Mothra creates a cocoon. In the film, he creates it on Tokyo Tower. In the book, he creates it on top of the Japanese National Parliament, the Diet
Mhm.
building. And at that point, then the gender pronouns disappear, and then we get a indication in the text that says, "Well, what kind of daughter will be born out of the cocoon once it hatches?" So we get a hint here that suddenly Mothra is now transforming into a female persona. So in a way, when I read this, I was like, "Oh wow, this is awesome!" Like Mothra is not just going through a transformation in that, in terms of egg, larva, moth, but also a kind of transformation in gender. So that Mothra is ultimately the perfect transgender kaiju. So I was like, oh wow, how cool is that? And I get so excited about this, especially because we're living in a world where transgender identity is under such like vicious, cruel attack.
Absolutely.
In every direction. And so I felt like I wanted to really, highlight that in the translation and bring that through in the translation, and mention it in the afterword. It's just as a little kind of sign of goodwill and and encouragement. That
Right.
here is this interesting and beautiful creature who is becoming their most beautiful self and most powerful self by the end of the book, and isn't that wonderful? So,
That that makes me so happy.
oh, good.
That makes me so happy. I guess deep in my soul, I always knew that Mothra was, like, a queer icon of sorts.
Yeah, yeah.
But, like, I mean, I keep like, when you were going through and explaining that, I kept thinking about, like, other iterations of Mothra we've seen, especially, like, the Mothra trilogy. In the Mothra trilogy is often criticized as it is,
Mhm,
for its target audience. Like, I feel like a lot of the story in that almost takes inspiration from, like, that transformational
mhm.
property, right? I guess I'm processing and piecing that together right now because that is such a really cool thing to think about,
Yeah.
and no, I am really excited for this to meet the
Oh,
world.
yay.
I think it's gonna be
Wonderful.
wonderful.
I'm also, I'll be honest. There's a little part of me that's a little bit worried about what the fans might think, because the novella was written before the movie, and so there there's certain parts of the novella that are really good and well developed. Like, for instance, there's a really interesting creation story from Infant Islands that's been pretty much just chopped out of the movie. So there's some really neat Easter eggs in there for the Mothra fan. But then certain other scenes, like the scenes where Mothra's attacking Japan, although they represent a pretty big chunk of the movie, maybe like a third of it or something like that, they're actually really, really short in the Japanese
Mhm,
novella. And the reason for that is kind of obvious. I think the authors knew that the special effects team would do whatever the heck they wanted with those scenes, so they didn't
mhm,
write in a lot of detail. So, like the scenes where Mothra's attacking first Tokyo and then attacking the other country, the superpower country. Those are a lot less carefully described than some of the
mhm.
parts of the book. So those might be a
Wow.
little bit less, exciting than the movie. But I do think that this novella makes up for it in some really, really interesting ways.
But
Oh,
contextually makes sense.
yeah, yeah, it does. It does. Yeah, when we consider that it was sort of the novella was sort of a plan for the movie that was going to be produced.
Yeah.
I also was super tickled to find out that there were 4 fairies instead of 2 in the novella. So that was really cool.
That is really cool. I
Yeah,
love
I kinda
that.
nerded out over that one a little bit.
Again, the Mothra trilogy kind of may have been inspired by that by having 3. Like, hey, hey, everyone. Anyway, my mission in life,
Yeah.
Jeffrey, is to promote the Mothra trilogy in any way I can,
Okay, alright.
because I firmly believe that they are 3 of the most underrated kaiju films ever. I don't quite have pamphlets yet to pass out door to door, but I'm getting there. So,
Excellent.
oh my goodness. It was wonderful hearing all of that news, and I think that it's going to create a lot of pomp and circumstance when it comes
Oh,
out.
cool.
Well, so, I mean, we met at G Fest this past year, and I
Yeah.
think that we kind of had this brief moment where we were kind of like bonding over being LGBTQ plus and growing up as Godzilla fans and like all of that. And ever since then, I was just like, there's gonna be a good conversation here. I know there's gonna be a good story. So, how were you first introduced to Godzilla?
Yeah, so in a way, I think my introduction to Godzilla was a lot like a lot of people. I saw the reruns on the weekends on TV, kind of after Saturday cartoons, and honestly, I don't remember which one I saw first, but I saw them all kind of jumbled and out of order, and I kept on seeing certain ones repeated over and over again. But it was that got me excited because I'd never seen a Japanese movie before. Like being 7 or 8 years old, I had never seen many images of Japan even,
Mhm,
and those movies are so filled with the super cool vintage mid-century modern looking Japan, very sleek, the use
mhm,
of colors is really interesting, and just everything about them really appealed to me. I mean, I have to admit that as much the interiors of the houses and the
Mhm.
clothes that there were, and the music and stuff like that, as the monsters themselves. So yeah, so I was really attracted to the Showa era, early Godzilla films, and still, honestly, those are the ones that have the biggest place in my heart for that
Mhm.
reason. But yeah, like with my friends, once we watched them together, and I had this one friend who, I don't know, seemed like he had an infinite supply of shoe boxes at his house, so we'd set them up, and that would be Tokyo, and we stomp through it.
I love
One
that.
of us would be Godzilla, one of us would be another monster, and then we'd tussle on top of them, destroying everything in the process. Yeah, that was fun.
That is so wholesome. My brother and I used to do that with snowbanks, actually,
Oh,
like so, like, we would, like, kind of coax our dad to, like, plow the snow in, like, specific ways,
uh-huh.
and then we
Oh,
would, like, pretend that we were, like, having a Godzilla battle on them.
nice.
It was wonderful. No, that sounds so wholesome.
That's cool. You could reenact the final scenes of Godzilla raids again there.
Right, exactly.
Right.
And I did get stuck in a snowbank once, which was kind of concerning, but when you're a kid, you learn from you learn from those mistakes, right?
Aw,
So were you like okay, so you were like a young kid at this point, right? When you were kind of like getting
that's right.
introduced to it. So as you grew into like the teenage years, like did anything shift? Did you have more of an exposure to Godzilla at that point?
Actually, so not really. As I grew into a teenager, I think my interest began to shift in other directions, and I still had a fondness for Godzilla, but kind of shy, awkward kid. I wasn't necessarily always talking about it to everybody. So I went to Japan for the first time when I was 15 years old, and so that was a really kind of formative time in my life. In Japan, I remember mentioning that I really liked the Godzilla movies to some friends, and they were kind of like, "Oh, tee hee hee, that's so cute," And I don't know. Yeah, as I kind of move forward, I felt like I went through a phase where I felt like, oh, I had to put the things from my childhood aside and not
Oh.
enjoy them in the way that I really want to enjoy them. So I kind of, I wouldn't say I like ever went through a period where it was like dissing Godzilla as like a childhood thing, but I did, I kind of moved away from it for a little while, and it was really much later that as once again I went through and I sat down as an maybe I was in my 30s, and I
Mhm.
watched like all of the Godzilla movies that I could get at the time. It's like again, like all of that love came back. Um, but really, the thing that kind of got me thinking about it as an subject of kind of academic study was the pandemic.
Mm.
And even before the pandemic, so I was in Japan during the 2011 disasters in northeastern Japan. And they were
Yeah.
like the most frightening thing in my life, for sure.
Wow.
But after 2011, there was a few years later, 5 years later, there was the movie Godzilla, Shin Godzilla in Japanese, and that's directly bringing Godzilla to bear upon these contemporary events, and so that got me thinking about Godzilla and its messaging and using it as kind of a window into cultural history. So it was really that experience that helped make me think about Godzilla again, and of course once I went watching the movies, all my love came flooding back.
And then the magic happened, you like, the translations happened, and
Yeah,
then the
yeah,
stars aligned.
yeah.
What
The translation was my pandemic project to keep myself from going insane. Like
Mhm.
during this crazy years when we're all cooped up indoors. Um,
Right.
I was looking scouting around for a project that I thought would be fun, and I'm like, you know what? I'm going to see if these Godzilla novels, if I can get the rights to work on them, and fortunately it worked out, and now here we are. Yeah. So that was my way of keeping myself sane. But I'm so glad that I chose that route because it was just fun and reconnecting with my own inner spirit a little bit. So
Mhm. No, it's interesting because I mean, I feel like quite a few fans have expressed on the 4 seasons of the show that they've gone through these phases where there may have been, like, a chunk of their lives where they kind of, like, not necessarily fell out of love with Godzilla, but, like, maybe they weren't, like, as exposed to Godzilla, but then when they fell back into it, they were like, what have I been missing?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
it
yeah.
almost sounds like you kind of had that
Oh,
experience, so
yeah.
that's super interesting.
Definitely, definitely. Yeah, absolutely. And just the more I dig into it, the more I feel like I'm seeing and discovering, and so that's really exciting.
Yeah,
It's such a as I said multiple times already, it's such a good window into these different moments in cultural history and the history of thought. You know.
right, yeah. Well, so I have purely indulgent questions to ask you
All right, on.
too. Like, I mean, you knew those were going to approach as well. Well, so I'm always curious to pick people's brains on like which Godzilla films are their favorites. So,
Yeah.
like, if you were to pick like a top three favorite Godzilla films, what would they be and why?
Yeah, no, I'd have to say that the original Godzilla 1954 has to be at the top, just because
Absolutely.
it's such a beautiful, deep movie. I mean, so iconic. I mean, it really carved out a space in film cinematic history. Yeah, I just you know, it can't be beat in a way. I really love maybe my second choice or third choice. I don't know. It's hard to rank after that. But very high on the list is Godzilla versus Hedorah, which I think is
Mm,
again a fascinating movie for both for a lot of reasons. The it is just filled with all that kind of weird, psychedelic, trippy,
mhm.
um, visual content that is just a sheer pleasure to watch.
A
Uh,
work of art. It's such a work of art. I
Absolutely.
love it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so, dreamy and filled with all these kind of, odd, sequences that,
Mhm,
is switching to animation and back to live action film. It's just brilliant, you know?
mhm,
And, so there's that. Also too, I mentioned that I'm very interested in things as a window into cultural history, but that's a fantastic window into cultural history. It really kind of captures the spirit of the early environmentalist movement.
mhm.
Um, there was a series of pollution events in Japan that caused massive sickness in the 1960s and 70s. And so this was, that movie was very directly reflecting upon a couple of the different economic, environmental disasters that Japan was going through.
Mhm,
60s, the mercury sludge at the bottom of Minamata Bay in southern Japan that
mhm,
killed a very large number of people. The Yokaichi asthma event, which where a bunch of kids were developing asthma. All those things are so clearly reflected in the film that when I show it to students, I love to show it to students because they
mm.
find the trippy quality of it so much fun. But then when we delve in and go deeper and look into the history of the events that inspired it, they're like, "Wow, man, this film is deep." So
Mm.
so I love that. Okay, well, gosh, that was sorry. I'm getting too long. And
No, no, you're good. I'm learning things I didn't even know, so I'm like
oh,
a sponge absorbing.
yeah, yeah. Oh, good, good, good.
So, okay, what is the third one? So
Uh,
the original Godzilla film, Hedorah, and then what's your third
I
one?
gotta say that Godzilla -1 is really up there. I wasn't expecting to fall in love with it, but I'd never been to a Godzilla film and really felt genuine terror before. Um,
Mhm,
the human dimension of it was so well done. The acting was first rate. The marriage of music and
mm,
cinematography was just so spectacularly done
yeah.
I came out of it just completely blown away.
I
Yeah.
know that movie made me so like, even the human component made me so
Yeah.
emotional.
Oh, yeah,
Like
yeah. I never had cried in a Godzilla movie before, so and I've still since watched it, I think, 4 or 5 more times, and every time I still can't stop the tears. So
so I think I saw it in theater 3 times.
uh-huh,
And so the first time I drug my fiance and like, "You're gonna come see this with me."
uh-huh,
Not like he's not a huge Godzilla fan, but like we'll enjoy a good flick with me every now and
uh-huh.
then. The second time I was like, I need to go by myself so I can cry in the theater by
Aw.
myself. And I did.
Did you
And I
watch the,
did.
the black and white one or, as well as the color version?
I did. He has not yet though. So
Okay.
he is a little hesitant too, but I was just like, we want to feel like the vibes. Like we
Yeah,
want the vibes. Well, okay, so speaking of humans,
yeah.
and characters in general, Do you have a favorite kaiju character beyond Godzilla? And who is your favorite human character?
Oh, that's it. Okay, now that gets to be pretty hard.
Mhm.
Because I have this sort of personal investment with Mothra. I probably would have to say Mothra. I mean, I don't know. I mean, it sounds like I'm just trying to promote the work that I've just been doing or whatever, but that's not the case.
But even if you were, that would be fine.
Oh, good. Okay. All right. Yeah, good. So, I when I saw it, I think I can't remember how old I was when I saw it for the first time, but I was so taken with the movie because it's so strange. It was so unlike any other monster film I'd ever seen. It's kind of sweet in a way that I hadn't expected. It's
Mhm.
beautiful. As you said, it's campy, and that's great fun. And so there were so many aspects of that I really found incredibly endearing, and just the sheer bizarreness of having the gigantic moth be the
Mhm.
the monster.
Mhm.
I don't know, maybe monster is not the right word because Mothra is also sort of a like protective figure as well. I
Mhm.
don't know, but yeah, I was really attracted to that character.
Same. Like, and I remember being very fascinated by the priestesses too,
Oh.
because, well, I mean, I confused the hell out of my parents, which is no surprise. But like, I spent 90% of like, I was like, do I want to be like this destructive saurian beast, or do I want to be a Mothra fairy singing to some deity? I don't know. And I would kind of like go between both of those, and they were just
Aw.
like, child, what is child, what is going on with you?
That's adorable.
I'm gonna probably put this in the show at some point, but I found like this really old video of me from when I was a kid,
Uh-huh.
like dancing to the Mothra song and doing choreography and everything like that. And now
Oh.
that I would like, I should have never been allowed access to a camera. But in a way, I kind of look back at that and I'm like, that was interesting. Like that
That's
was telling.
adorable. Oh my gosh, now everyone is gonna write to you, Donnie, and say, "We wanna see it." Myself included.
It'll happen eventually. I'm not afraid of embarrassing myself every now and then. So
You must know about this if you were dancing to Mothra, but, there was a Mothra ballet that was done in Northern Michigan, some time ago. Uh,
yes, I did hear about that.
yeah, I just, uh, watched it, a videotape of it, or an online version of it.
Is it
Um
on YouTube somewhere?
It's not publicly available, but
Oh, okay.
through kind of a friend of a friend, and I
Fair.
was able to watch it. But yeah, it's so. I was shocked. I was shocked at how beautiful and it was. I wish I could have been there in the audience to see it.
I feel like Mothra is like the perfect story to be conveyed through that medium, or even conveyed like on a Broadway scale too.
Yeah, yeah.
Just
It's
some ideas out there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Right, right, right. I mean, it's visually stunning. It's perfectly suited to a musical adaptation
Mhm.
because it's got the music in it right there from the beginning, to dance. Yeah, yeah,
Absolutely,
yeah.
absolutely. Did you have a favorite human character?
That gets a little bit harder. I'm not sure exactly who I'd answer for that one. I might have to think about that one a little bit more.
That's
Um,
fair.
yeah, I mean, the human characters, they come and go so much, especially during the early Godzilla films. We see the same actors, playing multiple roles. So I didn't quite uh, connect to the human characters in the same way that I think I did to the monsters. To be
Yeah.
quite frank.
No, that like you are not alone in feeling that way. There
Mm,
are quite a few people who would resonate with that for sure.
mm.
I think that's why like -1 was so striking for so many people is because again, I think the human component really because I don't think I've connected with human characters on a scale until I
Right,
watched Godzilla -1. So
right, right,
no, so I
right.
say that is a completely valid answer to that
No,
question.
I mean, and there are sort of intellectual reasons that I was certainly attracted to certain characters. For instance, like in Godzilla -1, the character of Dr. Noda, the guy who kind of comes
Mhm.
up with a solution about how to fight Godzilla. He was I don't know this for an absolute fact. I've not read this in confirmations from comments by the characters or so on. But he looks in that character in so the actor doesn't look very much like
Mhm.
the role that he's playing. Actually, that actor's relatively young and so on, but he's made up to look so much like Kayama Shigeru, the writer
Mhm.
of Godzilla from 1954, that I'm sure
Interesting.
it's not a coincidence. I can't believe it. He's wearing the same glasses. He's got the same very distinctive hairstyle. He's got the same distinctive streaks of gray in his hair. So I think that there's some kind of
Huh.
interesting ways in which like the characters, they picked up little pieces of history and worked them into the story. Uh,
That is so interesting.
yeah.
That is so okay, well, this is a big question.
Uh-huh.
And it's kind of like so I really like asking this because I mean, I feel like we all take something away from Godzilla,
Uh-huh.
whether we're always aware of it or not is up in the air, but
Yeah.
how would you argue Godzilla has shaped you into the person you are today?
Yeah, yeah. I don't know if this is a direct answer to that question or not, but um, it was a revelation to me to realize that we could sympathize with monsters. And I think Godzilla was the thing that helped teach me that when I was watching those early, reruns as a kid. In 1954, he's not especially a sympathetic character, but even there, where he's less of a sympathetic character than in some other places, he's there because his home has been destroyed. He's enacting. He's upset because his world is being turned upside down, but what stupid humans are doing. And
Mhm.
so, I think that my exposure to monsters up until that point had been, you know, like things like Dracula, or
Mhm.
based on Vlad the Impaler, like sticking spikes through people or whatever. Not
Mhm.
a very sympathetic character, right? But the idea that a monster is only a monster because of his relationship to the rest of the world, and what rest of the world is doing to him or her, that's a that was a very important piece of information. That was an important discovery for me. Um, and,
Right.
and as we grow up, I mean, I think that it's become increasingly clear the reason that we're fascinated by things that scare us is because that in some ways taps into our psyche. And
Right.
so, what are monsters doing? Monsters are performing some kind of intellectual work. They're allowing us to explore our fears, to
Yeah.
explore concerns, and that sort of thing. So, the monsters are not only just to be hated, but they're begging us to understand them. They're begging us to see the world through their eyes, so that we can
Yeah.
come to a better understanding of the world around us in general. Do you know what I mean?
No, I think that was perfectly said. I also like for me, I've always been fascinated by monsters being placed in this position of other, right? Because
Yes. Yes.
because like this anomalous other
Right.
I think is something that so many people connect with on varying different wavelengths,
Yeah.
but we're not always necessarily aware of it until we see it represented in something so otherworldly,
Mhm.
you know? So, no, I completely resonate with that
Mhm.
100%. So, okay, we're back to the indulgent questions. Um,
Okay.
do you like collecting any of Godzilla, like, memorabilia? Do you have a favorite figure or something?
I kind of made a decision because there's so many things out there, and it can be like an endless thing, where you spend all your money or all your collections, like filling up stuff everywhere. Um, I don't collect in quite the same way that a lot of people do.
Mhm.
What I collect instead, I collect books, and you can, I think, get a sense of just here in my study. There's piles of
Mhm.
books in every corner. They're
I love it.
just up to the ceiling over there. But so I kind of made a decision not to collect too much, but that way each thing that I have is special.
That's
So
fair.
yeah, so I do have some things that I really like here's my my rubber 1954 Godzilla head. It can, so if I ever want to, stomp on shoe boxes again, I can play the part.
It's at the ready. It's at the ready.
It's right there, yeah. And I do have yeah, I've got the hands here too. Rawr.
Oh my god, that is so cute.
Yeah, I mean, there's a part of me that that thinks that yeah. So the ones that I have, I keep special to myself by their scarcity. I mean, I also have a,
Absolutely.
I also have a nice big Godzilla thing in the other room that I got during my first trip to G Fest. So that was kind of fun. Yeah.
Oh, that is amazing. I don't collect extensively like I used to. I mean, I do have some things, but
Yeah.
my favorite things that I've been collecting, I just bought a Mothra cardigan like not long ago. Like it's just this
Oh,
big Mothra print cardigan.
nice.
But I think my favorite thing that I have right now is this. I like cute little plushies.
Uh huh.
So one moment it's this, and then the next,
Ooh.
is that not the cutest thing ever?
Funny. That's so funny.
I know, I have to rein myself in because I have way too many plushes at this point. But no,
Oh, man,
no.
that's great.
Um,
We ought to fill ourselves, fill our lives with these little
we
bits
do.
when we can. The world's
We
hard
have
there. Yeah,
the world is difficult. We need to enjoy ourselves to some extent.
right.
So, no, this has been such a fun conversation. And I do have one last question for you, I promise. And that would be, do you have any advice for Godzilla fans who may be new to the franchise?
Oh gosh, maybe my piece of advice would be to subscribe to the Criterion channel. The Criterion channel is such a good resource. Not only is it just an amazing repository of like classic films, they've done some of the best restorations of the Godzilla movies out there, and they have like just such beautiful versions of those old prints. If you're watching it like on pirated copies, like on Internet Archive or wherever, that's okay, I guess. But I think that really the really beautiful, crisp, copy of those movies can make a huge difference. They seem like
Absolutely.
pop off the screen sometimes, and so yeah, I think it was when went back and I sort of started watching the Godzilla movies again, in my adulthood. I got the like Criterion Collection DVDs. Um, they didn't have the streaming service yet, but I was stunned to watch them again and just see them in such vivid, crisp prints and transfers that I was just like,
Mhm.
oh my god, these are
Wow.
wonderful. Yeah. So I think that like watching them in a good quality transfer makes a big difference.
Is
It's
important.
yeah,
Absolutely is
yeah.
important.
I think they
So,
they make such a strong impact that way.
yeah, yeah. Now, so do you have I did say I promised there weren't any other questions. What about writing advice for writers? Because
Oh,
there are a lot of aspiring writers in the Godzilla fandom.
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, go for it. I mean, I think that one of the worst things that we do, and certainly I'm very guilty of this, so I don't know if I'm the best person to give this advice.
We writers always should practice what we preach because I'm the same
Right.
way.
But I think that a lot of us have in our brains somewhere the self-censorship mechanism, where we think, oh, that's not good enough, or oh, you
Mhm,
shouldn't do that, you shouldn't work on that, or oh, there are better things that you could be doing. Ignore that voice, because that's the voice that suppresses creativity. Yeah, it's only once you really kind of begin to write something, even if it's not your best work, that's the first stage to getting to the finished work. So
mhm.
yeah, so not stopping yourself and not putting on the brakes too early, I think is the key thing to do. Yeah.
Oh, I needed to hear that. I've been working on a poem collection that I don't wanna say I'm
Yeah.
stuck on it, but I've been procrastinating.
Oh, okay.
So that was like I was like, that's the jump start I needed to, and
Oh,
I hope that it also benefits other writers who are listening as well too. But it is
good.
excellent advice.
Oh, oh, good.
So
Well, I can't wait to read your poetry collection. So
thank you.
please.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So where can people find your work? Where can
So
people follow you?
Oh gosh, so so I'm not very good about social media these days. I've pulled back a bit from social media because I find that when I'm spending a lot of time on social media, then I'm not writing other things, and so yeah, I pulled back a little bit. I'm no longer using Twitter slash X like I did before. Instagram, I kind of only use very infrequently, but yeah, I probably should be better about these things.
Oh.
But yeah,
It's okay to create meaningful boundaries with social
yeah,
media.
yeah, I think so too. I think so too, because otherwise, boy, it can just suck up all your time. The one that I use the most often is Facebook.
Mhm.
Yeah, I'm of that generation when I logged onto Facebook as soon as it started, and yeah, and so that one I've continued to carry through. But absolutely, I mean, I'd love to connect with Godzilla fans and hear what they have to say. So yeah, by all
Well,
means, if you're gonna find me, that's probably the best place to do it.
awesome. Well, Jeffrey, this has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you for gracing this little itty bitty stage that I have. It
What
means a lot to me.
are you talking about? That's
No, it really does mean a lot to me, though.
thank you. No, this has been super fun.
Well,
Thank you.
that's awesome. Well, my friends, do not forget that Growing Up with Godzilla premieres on Sundays at 4, relatively, if I have my crap together. And don't forget to hit like, subscribe, all of those different things. Go follow Jeffrey's socials. Go check out Jeffrey's translation of Godzilla and Godzilla Raids Again. And go check out Jeffrey's poetry as well. P.S. everyone. And last but certainly not least, do not forget to keep standing tall, Godzilla fans. Bye.
Mm.